Now, for more insight on the joint declaration as well as on the summit itself, Dr. Kim Chang-su of the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses and our Defense Ministry correspondent Park Ji-won join us in the studio today. Welcome. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So first and foremost, the two leaders signed a joint summit agreement and held a joint press conference just hours ago. A lot came out of it. I mean, what can we make of this?
Because one of the most striking features of the joint agreement this time is on the military side, because the two defense ministers signed a very important documents about how they're going to exchange military activities and make some MDLs in other regions turn into peace zone. So there were, I was looking at their documents right now, and maybe there are very important 4 or 5 points laid out in their agreements, because this is actually what I've been looking for, because many people are talking about declaring the end of the Korean War, but actually it's a very complicated issue. It's not just a political agreement between two leaders, because it has huge implications in the security and defense area as well. So this particular document in the military area is very important. I think this is a very important first step toward declaring the end of war eventually. So this is actually what the most important substance and this part of the agreement this time. I was looking at some of the details, but what really stood out to me is agreements on how they're going to stop the hostile activities along the DMZ and also MDL. They also mentioned about turning the NLL into peace zone, peace scene, and also talking about the demining along and near the DMZ. And there are so many important issues, but these issues have been discussed long before, for maybe more than 20 years. But if you look at the last week's the working level meeting, that was like 14-hour, 17-hour marathon over the 2 days, and there was a very serious discussion between the two. But before that, there was a general level agreement rather, and detailing how we're going to, lay it out in this important document, which is attached document to the two presidents' joint agreement. I think this one is actually, and that's why probably President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, they were going to really finally entering a new era of no war. So this is really what they've been looking for, instead of terms of declaring the end of war to the Korean War. But actually, we are really now virtually entering a new era, in which there is no fear. The fear is there, no fear of war, and preventing the kind of a possible, massive arms clash between the two Koreas. So that's why this is a very important pragmatic measures to declaring that end of the war stage later on. Another very important stuff is maybe there were so many other defense ministers attended at the meeting right now, and connecting the railroads and ways, both on the western corridor and the eastern corridor, which is also very important to guard to provide a security to the not only to the visitors north and south, but also to the troops working in that part of the two corridors. So this kind of connecting the railroad and also the modernizing the facilities along the ways is also pretty much related to the military field, because there are a lot of troops nearby, and both particularly in the North Korea. So that's why this is also related to how we're going to secure the safety of the South Korean and North Korean passengers and tourists, and also including the future international tourists as well. So this is a very important documents leading up to the no fear of war, and actually sometimes if the China and the United States agrees to this very important concept, that is ending the war that have been lasted, that have actually stopped like 70-some years ago, but it's technically at war we are now. So we are looking for how we're going to revise and replace this armistice system into another new peace treaty. But actually, all the documents, if you look at them very carefully, word by word, if there is still no official translation by our ministry, but I think if you come up with a very detailed and English version of these documents, you'll see how the two governments, particularly the Foreign Ministry and Ministry of National Defense, are working hard to put all these very important concepts and words into this very important document. So we have to wait and see. And I think I noticed there have been tremendous efforts going into this particular document, but actually this is a more substantial agreement, steps toward no fear of war,
Right.
the end of, finally the end, declaring an end of war, the Korean end to the Korean War, and finally to the denuclearization of nuclear weapons and the facilities and whatnot. So this is a very important step that might lead to another meeting between Mr. Kim and Mr. Trump. I don't know exactly when and where, but this is a very important stepping stone
Right.
toward the Washington-Pyongyang meeting that has been really long waited.
All right, this is Lee Haek-chan, chairman of the party, ruling Democratic
The
Party.
number of the attendees in the summit was downsized unexpectedly, so all the ministers and Seoul mayor and Gangwon-do governor joined the meeting with the President Kim Jong-un of the Presidium of Supreme People's Assembly. So there was some miscommunication issue, and that is why the meeting was called off. And we met at 10 a.m. this morning, and we are going to talk about the agenda that we had in mind. We are going to propose a parliamentary level exchanges and meetings. We have already sent the letters pertaining to this issue, and the Speaker of the Parliament also conveyed such message. So are you saying that all the ministers should have come to this side? Yes, in the summit, only Chief Security Advisor Chung Yong and NIS Chief Seo-hun were attending. So all the ministers and mayor and governor was attending this meeting. Well, what we said was that the size of the meeting got bigger, and we wanted a separate meeting only with the three political party leaders. So you're saying that the theme should have been restricted to the parliamentary level exchanges. Is that your message? Yes, because it could have been it could cover too broad an issue, so that is why we wanted a separate meeting. So today you're going to talk with Mr. Kim Jong-un. Yes, we are going to talk about the talks on parliamentary level and the outcome of the summit. And I would like to propose that we would like a bigger achievements from the summit, and also propose the Independence Day ceremony commemorating the 100th anniversary next year. So you talked about this to Chairman Kim. Yes, during the last night's banquet, I told Chairman Kim that we needed to reschedule the meeting, and he responded, indeed, it should be, and immediately instructed Mr. Kim Chol to make this happen. So that's what it was, nothing else than that.
All right. I think that was about how the three heads of the parties, right? I believe Lee Haek-chan, chairman of the ruling Democratic Party, and Chung Dong-young of Party for Democracy and Peace, and Lee Jung-mi from the Justice Party. They were actually supposed to meet with their counterparts yesterday on Tuesday, but supposedly they didn't show up. And there were some talk about why they didn't show up, what happened, you know. But then I think we just heard from Mr. Lee that explaining how they got to meet with Kim Jong-nam, North Korea's parliamentary leader, this morning to discuss various issues that they did not get to yesterday. So he was kind of explaining what happened there and said that there is nothing else more than just miscommunication, and they were able to reschedule that meeting for this morning. So that's what that interview was about. So, I mean, going into that, what we just heard, he talked about how they wanted parliamentary exchanges. So we're really seeing these inter-Korean exchanges go into all areas, you know, not only just reducing military tensions and going to developing railway infrastructure projects, but we're seeing humanitarian, you know, issues being taken care of, and we're now seeing, you know, calls for parliamentary exchanges between the two Koreas. So what are your thoughts on that?
What amazes me is that how two Koreas are really sticking to their previous declaration, Panmunjom Declaration, signed at the end of April, and Chairman Kim Jong-un really said during today's joint press conference that that declaration has been the groundwork for all those efforts that's ongoing. And I mean, all those words written on that Panmunjom Declaration is becoming materialized and realized, and we are seeing many of those real events, like the opening of the InterKorean liaison office early in the morning, and also the specific measures of reducing inter-Korean tensions. Military tensions are all written in that document in April, and we are seeing, I mean, it sort of really amazes me how those words are really being transferred into real actions. And also, Chairman Kim Jong-un said he'd like to visit Seoul, possibly within this year.
Right.
So we are seeing that all these inter-Korean communications and exchanges are happening in all areas.
And
of
it's
our
happening
lives.
at a very fast speed, right?
Yeah, if you look at the Panmunjom Declaration, it is a very encompassing document, as a matter of fact. Not only the military, but foreign affairs and culture and sports and activities. Also, the Parliament Exchange is very important because we are maintaining a very good, three branches in the government, and the executive branch. This is very important. National Assembly and the PPM Supreme, Assembly. They have a lot of things to do to promote better relations between the two Koreas, because they are theoretically and realistically the representatives of all the voters out there. So I think this case is very symbolic, and because there was some time conflicts and there was a misunderstanding. Anyway, this morning they have clarified what happened to them yesterday, and they agreed to reschedule the meeting, which is very good. So I think parliamentary, definitely, they are the head of the major parties here in the South, and they really deserved their presentations in the North, and seeing their counterparts in the North and agreeing what they're going to do in the years to come. I think this is very important because we have a very good system that all the people selected their representatives in the National Assembly. Even the North Korea, they are a little bit different system. And I think this is a very important way of ameliorating our relations with the North.
Right. This was the picture from earlier when they met with Kim Jong-un, North Korea's ceremonial head of state, and also the parliamentary leader of North Korea. Well, it's good that this meeting, happened again after it got canceled yesterday.
In this said, they agreed to stop the mobilization training at the level of the regime and its above. It's very important because saying one thing, we are going to declare end of war, is one thing, but how we're going to implement that statement is very important. You have to come up with very concrete measures in the military field, that is stopping all these kind of hostile activity toward each other, including deploying all these different levels of weaponry and personnel close to the DMZ. And, for example, expanding the no-fly zone, also demining along the DMZ, and this is very important. So that's why the ministry came up with a very concrete levels of how we're going to implement what we agreed at the Panmunjom Declaration back in April. I think that's why this is symbolic, and this is, again, this is a very good sign. We really mean that we're going to reduce tensions, and we are entering the state of no war, instead of no fear war. That is, while we're going to maintain our own deterrence vis-a-vis North Korea, we are really looking for the reduced tensions along the DMZ and also NLA, possibly, and because our defense minister was an former CNO, Chief of Naval Operations, and he is a real expert in the Navy operations along the NDL, NLA. So that's why they agreed, even though they specifically mentioned the NLA turning into a kind of a peace zone, because it is highly complicated issues, because they got the approval from the UN's United Nations Command. So again, at this level, they really agreed on a very practical measures to really lift all the kind of worries and fears of a resumption of another war.
Well, I think it's notable that such a big delegation traveled with President Moon this time around, and it involved all people from various backgrounds, right? We have political leaders there, and also we had economic leaders, business leaders, right? So it really showed how President Moon wanted to use this chance to not only, bring about a breakthrough and the stalled negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea in terms of denuclearization talks, but it also shows how President Moon wanted to encompass various fields in terms of inter-Korean relations. And this time it wasn't just him and Chairman Kim, it was all these people that he traveled with. So I think this was notable in that sense.
I think that's in line with President Moon's speech during the joint press conference. He said to realize the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, not only him and the government, but also the very strong public support for the South Korean government's efforts should be there so that the ongoing efforts can go on. That's why I guess all these liberal political party leaders are also accompanying this delegation so that, the Moon administration's efforts to help the North Korea to achieve denuclearization with the strong support of party leaders.
Right. Now, I know we have talked about reducing military tensions and also how this summit has bear fruit in some areas, but then there are some talks over how today's joint declaration that came out between the two leaders, some were saying that it just wasn't enough in a way for Mr. Trump to, we saw his tweet in our earlier report, but he did have a positive tone about all this, right? Because Mr. Trump definitely needs something to put forth before his midterm elections in the U.S., and he has an American public to impress too. So for him, this is an important thing that would need to bear a big fruit, but some experts were saying that I talked to earlier that the fruit wasn't big enough this time, it seems. So I was wondering what your thoughts was on that, especially in terms of the denuclearization, I guess.
Yeah, fruit maybe not be big enough, contrary to expectation, because they had a very high expectation, high top demands toward what North Korea should do before a meeting with Mr. Trump. But I think it is a kind of catching up, trying to pick up the low, as we call it, low-hanging fruit, which is easily available to us, also easily available to North Koreans. It is very important. If you have just high expectations and North Koreans cannot meet their expectations, that's a real problem. So we have to go very realistically and virtually to giving the chance to really implement what they have vowed to do and what we want them to do. So this is a gradual kind of step by step, and also maybe we call the synchronized way. So giving quid pro quo, if we give this kind of assurance to North Korean region stability and safety, then North Korea in return will give the kind of clear measures that they are really mean business when it comes to denuclearization. So this is a kind of quid pro quo between North and South Korea, and also United States and North Korea as well. So I think this is a very comprehensive agreement to the two leaders. If there is just a 3-day meeting and they had just 2 meetings yesterday and this morning, and I think this is much more than we actually feel realistically expected from this meeting. Because they deal with all the important aspects to the South Korea-North Korea relationship, and also North Korea's relations with the outside world, symbolized by the denuclearization of their nuclear activities and facilities.
So then looking at Trump's reaction from his tweets, I guess, can we expect them to meet, Mr. Kim and Mr. Trump, to meet sometime this year? What are your thoughts?
I think stakes are still high, but Mr. Trump has also his other important agenda in the U.S. domestic politics, as a matter of fact. And there are so many other factors, Chinese and the Russians and Japanese. So because they really looking for a chance to see each other again after a very important and successful meeting in Singapore. So nobody knows the location and timing of their second summit meeting, but hopefully Mr. Trump will continue to get some secure assurance from North Korea, not confined to this time's agreements, because they are going to show some more elaboration of their activities, how they're going to implement the denuclearization. So this is should be a very convincing way that Mr. Trump can finally accept, okay, this is a little bit for short of my expectation, but this is something sufficient enough progress so that they can really pave the way to another meeting with me and Mr. Trump, Mr. Kim. So nobody knows, but with this special joint security agreement declaration, rather, I think we moved more positively in the way toward the denuclearization, which is the number one topic for Mr. Trump, understandably, but also for North Korea, it is the security guarantee of their regime provided in the United States and South Korea. Because this is all kind of stopping all hostile military activities between the two leaders, two Koreas, and also between potentially with the United States. This is a very, very solid proof they really mean to improve military relations and stop all these hostile military activities gradually, one by one. So this is a process of peace build, CBMs, what do you call the CBM, confidence building measures in the military. So starting with the military confidence and then moving next to the CBMs. So these are one of some specific examples of CBMs that have been laid out by North Korea and South Korea this time, so which may be pretty much closely reviewed by Washington and also USFK, UNC, and they are moving. Hopefully, they're moving toward the next step. How we're going to get more kind of CBMs, more evidence from North Korea that there is no way going back to. There's no way reverse their vows, and they should continue their pledges to denuclearize not just nuclear stop, but also other CBMs as well.
But then, in your opinion, though,
CMWs as well. I'm sorry.
But in your opinion, though, do you think the gap that the U.S. and North Korea had, which eventually led to a stalled negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea in terms of denuclearization talks, do you think that gap has been closed a little bit? Because what we know was that North Korea wanted the U.S. to sign a peace treaty and declare an official end to the Korean War before it, goes ahead and shows some concrete steps toward the denuclearization process, while the U.S. has been saying, no, you need to show us concrete steps towards denuclearization first before we go ahead and do all that and support all the efforts for inter-Korean exchanges and lifting sanctions and all that. So do you think that gap between North Korea and the U.S. might have been closed up a little bit between the two sides?
Yeah, definitely, because we are talking too much about the overgeneralization, because when you talk about the end of the war and then signing a new peace treaty to replace all the armistice agreement, it is not that simple because the word is word, but when it comes to actions, it's much more complicated. So there's so many activities attendant to particularly this kind of important diplomatic activity. So I think even though it is not specific term, using very specific term that might have been exploited and may have been sought for by Washington this time. But overall, if you look at all the documents and the joint statements coming out of this particular summit meeting, is moving much closer, good enough to close a gap between Washington and Pyongyang. Because people are just talking about very unnecessary things, because too much overgeneralization that actually leading to some other unnecessary problems. So you should be much more careful in selecting the word and interpreting the implication of this specific terminology in our agreement. I think overall, the agreement this time that have been reached between the two leaders we brought us together closer to as President Moon mentioned, we are entering a the era of no war rather. So that is the no war, but maybe actually to be more precise, should be a no fear of war. Yeah. So instead of declaring end of the Korean War, which has a lot of other very complicated military implications as well.
Now, that's the footage that we're seeing. This is not happening right now. This was before. They're getting ready for the joint conference and the signing of the agreement, I believe. This is a video from earlier when the two leaders got together at the Baekwon State Guest House after their second round of talks this morning. This was during their summit this morning, the second round of the summit this morning. And we're showing you the video as we're getting them in. I'm sure you saw them earlier in our broadcasts, but this is our footage from earlier.
Yes, the signing followed after about 70 minutes of one-on-one session between the two two leaders.
All right. So we see top officials from both sides standing by, and this is where the two leaders signed the joint declaration first, and then we saw the military officials signing the military agreement afterwards.
Right.
In attendance of the two leaders. So there's a President Moon waiting for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But like he said earlier, President Moon has said that he feels like that they've become a lot closer. I mean, it's not usual to meet someone that many times in such a short period of time, especially when they're leaders of the two Koreas, right? So, and this is like their third summit in just less than, I don't know how many months. So their first summit on April 27th, and then their second one in May, and now their third one in September. So everything moved by very quickly.
And the fourth one is coming,
Yeah.
yes, in Seoul.
And the two leaders are signing their joint declaration, the Pyeongyang joint
Maybe the
declaration.
first one will come pretty soon in the near future.
Yeah.
Maybe within the end of this year, because here in Seoul, we had a meeting in Panmunjom and Panmunjom again in the Pyeongyang, and finally it should be Seoul again. So this is a completion of a full series of summit diplomacy between the two Koreas, and which will provide a good enough assurance to the United States between both North and South Korea really agreed to mean that they are really going to reduce tensions, not only militarily, but also they're going to have a much better relationship between the North and South Korea, which will in turn will allow kind of a good relationship between Washington and North Korea, because North Korea really wants to normalize its relations with Washington and Tokyo, because they have been lacking for the last 25 years, as opposed to South Korea. We normalize our relations with Beijing and Moscow. So this kind of unbalance should be kind of corrected, and that's. I think we are moving into the right direction. And I look at Mr. Trump's tweet that it is good that North Korea we agreed to allow for international inspections.
Right.
This
Nuclear
which is
inspections.
good. Yeah, inspection and the verification are exactly the terminology they have been looking for.
Right.
And so this partially, satisfy his expectations out of this summit meeting, I guess.
And also during this joint this Pyeongyang declaration, they decided to normalize the operations of Kaesong Industrial Complex and Mount Kumgang tourism business, so that they will try to strengthen their inter-Korean exchanges, not only on military side, but also on economic side.
Right. But before those things can happen, though, the sanctions are still there. So that would need to be taken care of.
But North Korea also has said that they will permanently scrap the Dongchangni missile test site, and also they said they could scrap the Yongbyon nuclear complex permanently if the U.S. acts in accordance with the June
12th
June
agreement
12th agreement between North Korea and
So
the
it's
U.S.
almost like North Korea throwing the ball in the U.S. court, it seems like. If you guys do this, then we will scrap this and do this. What are your thoughts on that? I almost feel like, it's not like, all right, North Korea is going to scrap the Yongbyon nuclear complex permanently, but then it's in the spirit of the June 12th summit agreement with the U.S.
I just what you're trying to say about that. So too much exaggeration, too much overgeneralization, because if you do over-exaggerate, over-generalize, it'll entail tremendous problems related to that. So we have to be very specific. I think that's why Mr. Trump said at this time, North Korea will allow for some international inspections, which is a important kind of progress they've been looking for. So step one by one, but we are also providing some assurance to North Korea in military, in cultural events, and other exchange as well. So this is all the compilation of all the agreements that have been declared in the Panmunjom Declaration. So one by one, step by step, we're going to achieve toward the final implementation of all these points that they have agreed on in April. So that's why there may be some other kind of agreements that will be needed because it will cause not only, for example, like reactivating the Joint Military Commission again, which was actually there, but it has been so suspended for many years. But now they're going to resume this important commission. They can really discuss and agree on all the military-related issues between two Koreas again, maybe including for some kind of USFK and CNC, CFC and UNC matters, because it's not just any declaration of the end of the Korean War, but there is a huge implications particularly in the security and military field as well. So that will take many more years to go, and this is a very important the first step toward that the reduction of tensions between the two Koreas, and also on the Korean Peninsula in general. But related to that, the United States will be pleased to see if there's a reduced tension in the Korean Peninsula, and there is a much smaller contribution the United States is supposed to make in case there is a contingency in the peninsula again. So again, definitely this all indicates into the right direction, positive direction, both to the United States and to the South Korea.
All right, so President Moon Jae-in had a lot on his shoulders as he traveled to Pyongyang, right? And then now that there are two official rounds of talks with Mr. Kim and President Moon is over, do you think that pressure on Mr. Moon, our president, is somewhat lessened, or do you think there's still more to be accomplished by President Moon Jae-in as a mediator?
I don't know what he exactly feels about after all. Anyway, after 2 days, they agreed on a very important document, which will definitely lessen the burden on his shoulder. But of course, the post-summit questions, what kind of struggle will continue. And just like in any case, after all important summit meeting, they're always going to kind of follow up, quarters and debates and rebuttals about each and every word they used in the particular joint statement.
Right.
So we have to wait and see. But for the moment, President Moon was, even though he looked a little bit resolute and somber, but I think with these joint statement and joint press conference, he feels much relieved because the reactions from the outside world, including the United States, is positive rather than negative. And there are good positive reactions from the Korean public as well, in general, talking about all kind of events, exchanges in the military, in the culture, sports, and whatnot. This is a one step toward implementing what they agreed in the joint declaration in Panmunjom. So this is within just, I would say, 6 months, 7 months. This is a tremendous progress for such a short period of time, relatively speaking.
Yes. That we never could have imagined just like last year when the US
we should be much more realistic.
The US and North Korea were trading threats of war, and we didn't know where this was going, and then all of a sudden the Pyeongyang Olympics, and then we had the unified teams, and then we have the first summit ever, and then we have the summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un. So a lot has happened over the past 9 months now, right? So.
But one thing we have to remember, when everything's go right as we expect them, but we should also be very alert. One might be cautious. One might happen if something happens, because we don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows for sure. The idea that we are moving in the right direction, moving closer to the end states we have mentioned. No more war on the Korean Peninsula, and no more, hostility toward North Korean leadership by the United States and South Korea. So this is something that can really make them confident in their own capability to better their relations in the months to come, in the years to come. Otherwise, they maybe come up with a very negative tone, and but if you look at their tone, they ended on a very positive tone, which is a good signal that they are ready to talk, because the talks will take much longer time than we expect. If history is any guide, very important documents, it'll take me 5 or 6 years, and even after that, there was a kind of failures. So this is one of the lessons we learned. We are looking just for the success of any meeting, but sometimes we have to learn the lessons from the failures and why we failed in particular summit meeting. But this time we are really going to prevent the repetition of that kind of failures. So in that, because two leaders are now much knowledgeable about the lessons we learned over the last 20, 30 years, not just during his, their presidency, 4 or 5 years or just 2 years. Look at going back to the Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un. Yes, why we have agreed on some specific, important matters in military and everything. Why we failed? Why they have not materialized in the first place? So this is one of the lessons they learned, and they should continue to learn talking to the public in the South and the North. So as I mentioned yesterday, Mr. Kim Jong-un shows a very message that I'm open-minded, I'm concerned about the public concern, the people's lives, and I'm ready to open up and reform, which is very hard for North Korean leader to speak out from his own mouth. So this are all good indications. Again, it's very interesting for Mr. Trump that nuclear inspection is very good, and he has expected more to come, because we are going to have a very close, communication between the Blue House and the White House in the months to come.
Right. I mean, it all seems that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is really stepping up efforts to be received as a normal nation by the international community, not only the U.S. and South Korea, but that we're a normal country, we want to establish normal ties. So if our nuclear weapons are a problem, yeah, sure, we want a nuclear-free peninsula as well. So we will try to work toward that. But I think the sticking point there is how, I guess, the sides are going to get to that goal. But at the same time, it seems that Mr. Kim's efforts have been going in the right direction in that sense, because we also heard that the Koreas are jointly holding the Summer Olympics in 2032. So we're going to be definitely seeing more cultural and sports exchanges as well between the two sides. So that's a positive news there, I think.
And to give some of the specific details of the military agreement signed between the two defense ministers, both sides agreed to suspend military exercises near the military demarcation line starting November 1st, but that's only within 5 kilometers from the MDL, and exercises like firing and field training exercises will be suspended. So it's not like all exercises are suspended, but only within those 5 kilometers. And both sides also agreed to set no-fly zones near the MDL line from November 1st as well. And they agree to constantly in contact with each other, and we've seen that they agree to establish this military commission.
Joint commission, reactivating rather than establishing a new. It's a reactivation of the already existing, even though they have defunct long time ago. Yes.
And also they agreed to altogether 11 guard posts located within 1 kilometer from the MDL will be removed until the end of this year, and joint security area in Panmunjom will be disarmed, and any landmines inside the JSA area will be removed for 20 days starting October 1st. So we see a lot of specific details inside this comprehensive military agreements, and also they agreed to jointly discover some war remains inside the DMZ, and all landmines and explosives could be there. So all these explosives will be removed for 2 months from October 1st to the end of November. And this is a pilot program. So they will focus on removing on these explosives to safely continue the recovery of war remains. And about 80 to about 100 members from both sides will be assigned to this joint recovery team. And they will start their real work of recovering war remains from next year, about April to October next year. And also there are a lot of discussions about Northern Limit Line because North Korea has never really acknowledged the existence of this line, but two sides agreed to establish maritime peace zone, and specific details will be consulted at this joint military commission.
So a lot of specific details in that military agreement.
Yeah, there are many details in this very important military documents. But as a matter of fact, all these details, all the points have been discussed with the two Koreas for a long time. We had so many general level meetings and working level meetings in the past. But the problem we have not reached on this specifics. But this time, the fact they have finally agreed on those specific kind of pilot program, for example, this is a long overdue, as a matter of fact. But I think it's finally we are coming to the light at the end of the long tunnel. Yes.
And the two sides worked hard for it.
That's right.
We had a lot of working level talks and military talks up until the third summit, right? And like you mentioned before, they had 70-hour-long marathon talks over it. So it definitely seemed like those talks bear fruit this time around. And it all leads to, Dr. Kim said, it's going to all lead to a more peaceful peninsula, Korea, for the two Koreas, and that the two Koreas are no longer going to have to worry so much about a divided peninsula war fears, So in that sense, I think this summit was very successful.
According to the expression, finally freeing ourselves from the fear of another war. That's the terminology they have used. Yes, the two ministers signing are very important documents. They really have all the points laid out in the documents, because this is something that we have been looking for, but it took us such a long time, to agree at this particular time, because it's such a difficult, because North Korea was not confident in their capability to deal with any military clashes, potential clashes. So one thing I noticed is another one, how we're going to prevent what you call the incidental military clashes, because sometimes military provocations do happen even without any specific design on either party. It just happens incidentally. So how are we going to prevent effectively all these incidental military clashes, which is very important. Quite often a massive war, all-out war, is almost impossible to think about. But this kind of military provocation clashes, they might lead to a massive, scale war. That should be stopped. That should have been prevented.
And all those specific procedures to prevent those incidental clashes are also detailed in this comprehensive military agreements. And to reach on this final full text, two sides have held a series of general level and colonel level military talks over the past months. And the previous one held earlier this month that took about 17-hour marathon talks between two colonel level talks between two countries.
All right. Well, definitely a lot of positive developments we saw over the last 2 days, and especially how Mr. Moon, our president, and the First Lady Kim Jong-un was received yesterday. That was quite a scene there. It was a very welcoming ceremony for our leader, and Mr. Kim said that this is what he promised during their summit, that once you come visit Pyongyang, we will welcome you in the most welcoming way, and it seems that he followed through on that promise.
One thing I noticed that it's in the heart of Pyongyang, with all these Pyongyang citizens standing along the line, because Mr. Kim really wants to show respect, because this is still a kind of Confucian society, and they have to show kind of respect to the elderly. It's a kind of virtue. I think this is a kind of very important message both to North Korean citizens and to the South Koreans. So this is I'm a normal normal leader. We want to establish a normal relation between two Korea rather than just special relations that have been defined for the last several decades. So we enter a new era that each respect each other, And because Mr. Moon is much older than Mr. Kim,
Right.
and he really deserved the respect from the younger. So that's even though it sounds like a trivial thing, but it's very important about how he's going to abide by all the customs in Korean society and international law as well. So showing respect to the elderly and showing to the leader of South Korea, which is much more powerful. They all noticed that. But Mr. Kim's attitude much more forthcoming, just doing, giving all kind of hostility. I mean, not hostility, but hospitality by, taking the first lady to the children's hospital and the music school. So they really mean that we are just like any normal country. We are agreeable and we are accessible to the outside world, including the South Koreans and also the United States. So this is, again, as I pointed yesterday, it's very highly meticulously choreographed by the experts in the North.
Yes.
They're the real experts. Okay.
And we see that the President Moon has really successfully achieved his main goal. It was 3 agendas yesterday during this summit, was improving the inter-Korean relations, and secondly, mediating the denuclearization talks going on between North Korea and the U.S., and lastly, reducing military tensions. And it seems like that he has really successfully achieving all these 3 main goals here.
I agree with you. Yes,
well, we'll definitely wait and see how this pans out from here on out. I mean, Mr. Moon, President Moon Jae-in is going to return home tomorrow after wrapping up his schedule in Pyeongyang today. So we'll see what further reactions we get from the related parties and where we go from here. But for now, we know that Mr. Kim Jong-un is likely to visit Seoul, the capital, within this year probably. So thank you so much for your insight and your expertise in the issue. We'll be seeing you here again soon.
Thanks for having me.